What's up YouTube, this is Ryan from AnnihilatorMTG here, and I'm back again with some more Modern. This week we're going to be playing Enchantress. As far as the archetype goes, I've always enjoyed playing it in Commander. Being able to amass this ridiculous engine of hard to interact with good stuff permanents is pretty darn cool. With that said, I've never actually played the archetype in a non-singleton format, so here we are. For those who are unaware, the namesake card Enchantress and Sythis respectively allow us to generate a ton of value by netting us a card every single time we cast an enchantment, have multiple copies on board, and things are going to get out of hand very quickly. Not to mention that with Sythis, we can gain a significant amount of life over the course of a match. Then we have our defensive permanents. Both Greater Auramancy and Sterling Grove give Shroud to every other enchantment on the board. Not only is this an incredible way to defend our pieces, but if we have two copies of either card on board at the same time, we've effectively locked out interaction for the duration of the game. Now, what can we actually do with that outside of protecting our Enchantress spells? Well, allow me to introduce you to Solitary Confinement. Land this card on a board with an Enchantress or two, and you will never take damage ever again. As you can imagine, this card beats certain strategies without much effort. That isn't to say that game locks are the only way to win. When we pair cards like Sanctum Weaver and Destiny Spinner together on a board littered with enchantments, we'll be able to close things out very quickly. This deck is truly something else, but to be honest, I'm a little nervous. There are definitely some easy routes to victory with a build like this, but there are also some intricate sequences that I'm not 100% familiar with. Hopefully this will be a learning experience for all of us. With that said, let's hop into the first match and see how it goes. Alrighty, looks like we found our opponent here. Best of luck to you, my friend, and this hand seems good enough. We'll keep it. They start things off with an Arid Mesa, and then pass immediately. We draw a Sanctum Weaver, that's pretty good. Let's jam the Windswept Heath, and we'll see what they're playing. During our end step, they crack their fetch, finding themselves a tap Sacred Foundry. Up next, they play a Flooded Strand, passing once again. During their end step, we'll crack the Windswept Heath, grabbing a tap Temple Garden, drawing another copy of Sterling Grove. First things first, let's play a Stomping Ground, and then I think we're going to cast a Sterling Grove before the Sythis. Based on their mana, I'm a little bit concerned with removal. This does hurt our value and speed a little bit, but the Shroud is really nice. Either way, they crack their Flooded Strand, finding a breeding pool, so I guess this means that we might be playing against that elemental deck. On their main phase, they play an untapped Hollowed Fountain, followed up by a Flamekin Harbinger, tutoring for a Risen Reef. That appears to be it. We draw Basic Forest, excellent, so this actually puts us in a really weird spot. For value, the best thing to do here is to play either Sythis or an Enchantress. However, due to our opponent's naturally greedy mana base, Blood Moon feels like a really back-breaking play here. The main downside to that plan is that we won't have immediate access to white mana. Yeah, why not? Let's go for it. The cool thing about this is that Blood Moon blanks their Risen Reef for at least a turn or two, and that assumes that they have multiple basics in hand, which they probably don't. On our opponent's turn, they decide to put their companion into hand, then they attack immediately. That'll bring us down to 16, and it looks like they're stuck. Drawing another Enchantress, might as well cast it. Once we get a couple of these on board, we're basically going to have this game on lock. Seems like they drew a Cavern, attacking once again, and bringing us down to 15. Up next, we draw a copy of On Thin Ice. I think we're just going to cast another Enchantress, drawing a Vista, and then we'll send it back. Without playing a land, they attack us with their Flamekin, taking us down to 14 and hard passing. We draw an Abundant Growth. Let's play a Sanctum Weaver in the meantime, and if it survives, we'll have near perfect mana. Seeing another On Thin Ice and a fetch. Ooh, and they respond by evoking a Subtlety. That's massive card disadvantage for them, especially with our Enchantress effects. They play a fetch of their own, attacking once again, and interestingly enough, they hardcast a Fury. Unfortunately, though, that means that their Flamekin has to die. We redraw the Sanctum Weaver, let's jam it, hitting another copy and a fetch. We'll play it and then hope that they don't draw another Fury. Without doing much else, they swing in, hitting us for 6 and passing right away. We might be in the clear, drawing an Abundant Growth. Let's tap the Weaver for a bunch of white mana, then we'll cast On Thin Ice, targeting their dude. We might have punted a bit there by not casting the Sythis first. Either way, we'll cast that too, hitting a Blood Moon and more removal. Let's cast the Moon to draw some more. We find some basics. Let's play one, then we'll cast a Destiny Spinner, and I think we more or less have this in the bag. Guess they have nothing else as they pass straight through. We draw an Abundant Growth, let's play a basic, then we'll generate a bunch of green mana with a Weaver, start animating our lands, and they scoop it up, nice. Honestly, this feels like a matchup where we don't have to concern ourselves too much with sideboarding. I'm sure they have very powerful starts, but unless they take us down really quickly, we should be fine. Yeah, we'll submit. This hand seems good enough. We could probably use a Shroud effect or two, but outside of that, I'm very happy with this. They get things rolling with a Windswept Heath, likely prioritizing basics. Speak of the devil, we draw Sterling Grove. This hand just got way better. Let's play and crack the Vista, finding ourselves a basic forest. Then we'll cast the Abundant Growth, drawing a Plains. During our end step, they crack their fetch for a forest, as expected. On their main phase, they play an untapped Breeding Pool, oddly enough tapping and then changing their minds. Instead, they just pass. We draw another Vista, getting a little bit flooded here. Let's play the Plains, then we'll set up the Sterling Grove. Now we're in a unique position where if they don't destroy the Grove, the Solitary Confinement will lock them out of the game almost immediately. Smart stuff from our opponent as they play a basic Plains, then cast an Unsettled Mariner. Absolutely love that card. Geez, and we draw another fetch. Guess we'll play and crack a Vista, grabbing a Plains, and then cast the Enchantress. Up next, they play an untapped Sacred Foundry, followed up by an Omnath. That's pretty cool. It replaces itself. Then they swing in for 2. That'll take us down to 16. Drawing a Utopia Sprawl. Let's play the basic, then we'll cast it. Hitting another Enchantress. I think we'll choose red. Just to be safe, I think we're going to cast the Solitary Confinement now rather than next turn, and with the amount of Enchantress effects we have, we should be set. They jam a Cavern. That'll gain them some life. Then weirdly enough, they swing in with a team. Guess they didn't read the card. We take no damage. During their second main phase, they cast a Fury, distributing the damage so nothing dies. Alright, so let's discard a land. Then we'll play and crack the Vista, grabbing a forest, casting the Sythis and drawing a card. Hitting an Abundant Growth is actually quite good here. Let's play Enchantress number 2, effectively making it the third, drawing even more cards. Finally, we'll cast the Abundant Growth, and at this point in the game, this is strictly better than Ancestral. Kudos to our opponent for not scooping yet, I can respect that. They play a copy of Foundation Breaker. I've seen this card a lot more lately. That'll kill our Grove, playing an untapped Temple Garden, effectively gaining 2 life, and then they cast another Mariner. We discard a land, then we'll cast Sanctum Weaver number 1, finding an Auramancy, perfect. Let's play it. So they're back to square one. I think we're also going to cast the second Weaver as well. Alright opponent, this might be your last chance. Let's see what happens. They start off with a Flooded Strand, gaining them some more life, adding their companion to hand, and then they just pass. Little surprised by that. Let's discard a land. To get things started, we'll tap a Sanctum Weaver for a ton of green, casting the Destiny Spinner. We draw a bunch, one of which is a Temple Garden. Let's play it. Tapping Sanctum Weaver number 2 for a bunch of white mana. Then we'll start animating lands, casting a copy of On Thin Ice, targeting their Omnath, and paying the 2 mana. Second verse, same as the first, this time hitting the Fury. Finally, we'll swing in with our dudes. They triple block one of our lands. Then we see them evoke a Solitude. We gain 1 billion life, their Solitude dies, and we're still gonna hit them for 27. GG's. Alrighty, looks like we found our opponent here. Best of luck to you, my friend, and this hand seems keepable. If we didn't have the Abundant Growth, I'd be a little more concerned, but we should be fine. They start things off with a tapped Watery Grave, always happy to see that. We draw another copy of Abundant Growth, let's jam the Temple Garden, then we'll cast one of them, drawing a basic, and we'll send it back. During their main phase, they play and crack a Polluted Delta, grabbing themselves a basic island, followed up by a Mesmeric Orb. Alright, so mill does scare me a bit, especially in game 1. We mill a card, then draw Vista, let's play the basic, and I think we'll cast Sythis. They untap and mill 2, immediately casting another orb. Any kind of recursive mill effect is something that we definitely want to avoid. After milling a bunch, we draw some removal, let's jam the Vista, cracking it for a Plains, then we'll cast the Sanctum Weaver, drawing a Utopia Sprawl, might as well go for it, think we'll choose red, attacking for 1, that'll bring him down to 18, and we'll pass. Up next, they cast a Crab, make that 2. That's not really good for us, but on the bright side, it does look like they're out of lands. We mill a ton, then during our upkeep, they Surgical our Blood Moon, drawing an Auramancy. Let's start things off with a copy of On Thin Ice, targeting the Ruin Crab. Then we'll cast the Auramancy, seeing an Enchantress, and followed up by an Abundant Growth. Think we'll play the Stomping Ground untapped, casting the Utopia Sprawl, and drawing once again. Let's tap the Weaver for a ton of green and jam the Destiny Spinner, casting another Utopia Sprawl, as well as Destiny Spinner number 2, and last but not least, we'll cast the Enchantress. We sequence things this way so that we would draw the least amount of cards that we can. At this stage of the game, drawing a ton of cards actively hurts us. Seems like our opponent has found another land, as they mill us for 3. They've got 2 cards left in hand, one of which is a Fractured Sanity, and it looks like we're toast. Alright, I think we'll be cutting the Solitary Confinements, 2 copies of Abundant Growth, a Mana Bloom, and an Enchantress. That way we can bring in Kozilek, the Seals, the Wheels, and then Veil of Summer. The sharp-eyed among you are probably wondering why we're not including Leyline. We totally could, but the last mill list I played was able to mitigate Leyline almost entirely, so I want to see if we can operate without it. Yeah, that should be fine, we'll submit. This hand is a bit clunky, but other than that, it actually looks really good. Let's start things off with a Vista, cracking it and grabbing a Forest, then we'll cast the Utopia Sprawl, choosing white, and then we'll pass. Looks like there's no Archive Trap, that's very good news. They lead off with the Darkslick Shores, then cast a Crab. We draw Forest, let's cast Sythis, followed up by On Thin Ice, drawing an Auramancy, and exiling their creature. Strong stuff so far, wonder if our opponent can handle this. They play and crack a Polluted Delta, finding an island, and then cycling a Fractured Sanity. That's hardly an issue. Up next we see a Sanctum Weaver, let's play the Forest, followed up by an Auramancy. This should protect our creatures quite nicely. Finally, we'll cast the Sanctum Weaver, drawing a Vista, and I actually think we might be able to play Kozilek next turn. We'll swing in, that'll take them down to 18, and send it back. During their main phase, they play a Field of Ruin. Our basic lands are definitely paying off here, as they pass straight through. We draw another Utopia Sprawl, might as well cast it, finding another Sythis, and choosing red. Then we'll cast the Destiny Spinner, still maintaining enough potential mana to cast the Kozilek. Speaking of which, we'll tap the Weaver for a ton of mana, then play and crack the Vista, grabbing a basic, and we'll cast him. Unfortunately, they respond with an Archive Trap, things are getting tense, then they Surgical or Wheel. The ability resolves, as does the creature. We'll swing in for 1 and see if our opponent can close it out. Once again, they cycle a Fractured Sanity, that could be worse, followed up by a Crab, then they play a tapped Watery Grave, milling us for 3, and wow, is that it? We might actually have this one. Drawing a Blood Moon, let's play a Forest, then we'll tap the Weaver for a ton of mana, start animating our lands, then we'll swing in, triggering Annihilator 4, they block the Kozilek, and we take him down to 0. Okay, so it might actually be worthwhile to trim on a Blood Moon and an Enchantress to make room for 2 ley lines. This might be wrong, but I kind of feel like mixing it up. We'll submit. Alright, looks like we've lucked out big time, definitely keeping this one. Let's jam the ley line. They start things off with a Flooded Strand, cracking it and grabbing a basic island, and then they play a Crab. We draw an Abundant Growth. Since we have the Leyline, we don't really need to worry about Archive Trap anymore. So we'll play our Fetch, then crack it for a basic Forest, casting a Utopia Sprawl. Think we'll choose red, and we'll see what you got, opponent. During their main phase, they cast a Soul Guide Lantern, exiling our land. Then they play a Polluted Delta, cracking it and grabbing a tapped Watery Grave. Unfortunately for mill players as a whole, you're incentivized to fetch for Watery Grave so that you can play Fractured Sanity on time while still having access to black mana, and by extension this makes you quite weak to Blood Moon. Speaking of basics, we draw planes, that settles it as we cast the Blood Moon, so now we just have to dodge more Ruin Crabs and things like Mesmeric Orb. Up next they play a non-basic, milling us for 3 once again, then they pass straight through. We draw another Fetch, let's play a land, then we'll cast the Abundant Growth, finding an Auramancy. Think we're going to cast the Seal, that way we can address the Lantern. We'll crack it immediately. They respond by cashing it in, and now we just gotta wait. They play another non-basic, milling us for 3, then they cast a Hedron Crab, which isn't a punt since they can't target us. Drawing a Sythis, might as well cast it, that's all we can really do for now. Our opponent's luck is not improving as they pass straight through. We draw an Enchantress, let's cast the Auramancy just to be safe. That gets us another Weaver, think we're gonna play one of them. Now our mana problems should be long behind us. During their main phase, they cast a Mesmeric Orb. While that is threatening, I'm not so sure it's fast enough. We mill some, then draw land, playing 1 for turn. Then we'll tap the Weaver for a bunch of mana, casting the Enchantress and drawing a card. It's a Destiny Spinner, excellent, let's cast that as well. We see another Weaver, think we want to cast that too. And now that we have all this mana, a way to close out the game, and protection in the form of Veil of Summer, I think we have this locked up. Up next, they cycle a Fractured Sanity. Let's see if they have anything else. They do not. Okay, so let's get things started by generating a ton of mana with our Weavers. Then we animate our lands. In response to the final activation, they cast a Surgical, and then they just scoop it up. GG's. Alrighty, looks like we found our opponent here. Best of luck to you, my friend. And wow, this hand is bad. We'll have to mulligan. This one is way better. Definitely keeping this. Let's ship the Bloom. First things first, our opponent plays an untapped Steam Vents and sends it right back. We draw another Enchantress. Excellent. Let's play and crack the Fetch, grabbing a basic Forest, and then we'll jam the Utopia Sprawl. Choosing white. During our end step, they cycle a Riverwinder. Okay, so Living End is a bit rough. We can't really afford to dirtle around too much. They play a Spire Bluff and pass immediately. No real reason for them to play at sorcery speed. We draw Sanctum Weaver, that's not terrible. Let's play our Temple Garden untapped, and then we'll cast an Enchantress. My main concern here is actually just Brazen Borrower, specifically Petty Theft. If we lose ground even a little, that single Riverwinder would be enough to beat us. With that said, they cycle an Aven during our end step. Up next, they play a Misty Rainforest, cracking it and finding a basic island, and then they Petty Theft our Enchantress. This game is going to be tough. Drawing a Wooded Foothills, let's play it, then we'll recast our Enchantress. On our end step, they cycle a Curator, then we see a basic forest, oh boy, and here comes the Shardless Agent, cascading into a Living End, and the gang's all here. I suppose we'll crack the fetch during their end step, that'll put us 1 damage away from lethal, grabbing a Temple Garden. We draw basic plains, that's not too bad. Let's lead off with the On Thin Ice, drawing a Solitary Confinement, no way, targeting their Curator. Since we have a little more time, I think we're going to cast the Auramancy before anything else, hitting another Confinement, then we'll jam the Sanctum Weaver, and this puts us in a much better position to not get locked out by the Confinement tax. During their main phase, they cycle an Architect, then they move in for combat, swinging in with a team, that brings us down to 5. Drawing a Blood Moon, let's play the Stomping Ground untapped, then we'll cast Enchantress number 2, seeing a Sterling Grove, excellent, we'll cast that as well. Our enchantments are now fully protected, let's tap the Weaver for a bunch of white mana, casting Solitary Confinement, and they scoop it up, nice. So in this matchup, I think we're going to trim the Blood Moons and the Mana Bloom, then we'll bring in 2 copies of Wheel and 2 copies of Veil of Summer. Yep, that should be fine, we'll submit. Our hand is kind of bad here, we'll mulligan, this is much better, let's ship the Temple Garden, and see what they got. They go all the way down to 4, leading off with a tapped Breeding Pool, so no turn 1 cycler, outside of maybe a Street Wraith. We draw Veil, let's jam the basic forest, then we'll cast the Utopia Sprawl. Think we're going to choose green, that way we can protect our wheel from any Force of Negations. During their main phase, they cycle a Street Wraith, then we see a Spire Bluff, passing straight through. We draw an Enchantress, so I actually think we should just lead with the Auramancy, because if we cast the wheel, they could just cycle 2 creatures in response, effectively negating the entire purpose of the card. This is definitely a scenario where Rest in Peace is infinitely better. With that said, I do like the wheel for the mill matchup. Either way, let's cast the Utopia Sprawl, this time choosing white. Oddly enough, they don't cycle anything. Up next, they play a Botanical Sanctum, then evoke a Foundation Breaker. I'm okay with this. The Auramancy is gonna die, but at least it's not the Enchantress. Drawing a copy of Solitary Confinement, let's cast the Enchantress, holding up a green for the Veil. It resolves. On their main phase, they cycle a Curator, then evoke another Foundation Breaker, there goes the Enchantress. We draw another Utopia Sprawl, guess we'll cast the Wheel. Then I think we're going to hold on to the rest, just in case we draw another Enchantress. They play a Misty Rainforest and pass straight through. We draw Windswept Heath, might as well play it. Second verse same as the first, as they jam another Misty. During their end step, we'll crack our fetch, grabbing a tap Stomping Ground, drawing yet another land. Yep, this feels miserable, we'll play it. On their main phase, they cast a Shardless Agent, cascading into a Living End and bringing back their dudes. Unfortunately, this means that 2 of our enchantments are going to be destroyed. Once again, we'll crack our fetch, grabbing a basic. Then, as weird as this may be, I think we actually want to cycle our Veil. This gives us far less protection, but we do get to see an extra card. It's an Abundant Growth. We draw Sythis, let's cast it. Then we'll play the Abundant Growth, and wow, it only just occurred to me how risky that was. We probably should have just cast the Utopia Sprawl, targeting our untapped forest. Alright, we need to tighten the bolts big time. We're playing like trash. Let's jam the Vista, cracking it for a plains. Then we'll cast the Solitary Confinement, drawing another land. That's not good. Here's hoping they don't have any more removal. They pass on their turn. Let's discard a land. Then we'll cast the Utopia Sprawl, drawing another land. You've got to be kidding. We'll play the fetch, and now we need to get really lucky. During their main phase, they cycle a Street Wraith, then they evoke a Grief. That does nothing. Let's crack the fetch, getting a forest. Now we'll have to let the Solitary Confinement die. That way we can draw another card. It's a land, figures. We can survive 1 more round of attacks, but that'll be it. Speaking of which, they swing in with a team. That brings us down to 6. Then they evoke another Grief. It dies. Let's crack our Vista for the second to last forest. After that, we'll only have like a 15% chance to hit another land. Drawing it on Thin Ice, let's cast it. We see another Solitary, that's just what we needed. Think we'll exile the Curator. Finally casting the Confinement. I almost can't believe it. We drew another land. Okay, so we have to do that all over again. Our opponent passes through. We've been the Solitary. Let's see what we draw. And it's another land. Nice. Well, that was a train wreck. There's really no other way to put it. I guess we'll just resubmit. Gonna try to stay positive for this one, as we see a pretty decent hand. The only real risk is if they force our Utopia Sprawl, although I doubt they'll expect us to be light on lands after that showing. Either way, let's play and crack our fetch, grabbing a basic forest, then we'll jam the Utopia Sprawl, no doubt choosing white. They play and crack a Misty, finding themselves an untapped breeding pool, then they cycle a Curator at sorcery speed, probably looking for a Force of Negation or something. We draw a copy of On Thin Ice, let's not make the same mistake again, and immediately cast the wheel. If they bounce it or have some way to counter it, that's fine. Luckily for us though, it does resolve. Up next, they cycle another Curator, then a Street Wraith, make that 2, and wow, they didn't find a land in any of that. We see a Sythis, that'll do, let's cast it. They untap and then cycle an Architect, no doubt looking for a land, and then they just concede. Wow, that match was really strange. GG's opponent. And there you have it. Enchantress is kind of crazy. I know that I didn't play nearly as well as I should have, but to be honest, I don't think anyone is just going to pick up the deck out of nowhere and immediately know everything about it. It definitely feels like a build that really rewards experience, especially when it comes to sequencing in the early game. Either way, I appreciate your patience, especially when it comes to me trying out new decks. I always want to keep things fresh and entertaining on the channel, so I hope you all enjoy it. And with that said, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. This stuff really does help, and as always, stay safe out there and have a good one.